Hello and welcome to Media7. I'm Russell Brown. In this week's show, we'll look at the Serious Fraud Officer's power to seize evidence from journalists, should we be worried, and MediaWorks' surprise rebranding of its TV channels. But first, no matter where you went this past week, you couldn't get away from the Hobbitses.
Why are you targeting the Hobbit, Simon?
Was it the media get of the year or mob harassment?
Why are you targeting the Hobbit?
When Australian unionist Simon Whipp, who had managed to avoid the local media for a month after he signed a global ban on actors working for The Hobbit, emerged from dinner with two of his New Zealand equity counterparts, questions were asked.
Why are you targeting the Hobbit, Simon? What have you got to say?
If not exactly answered. A difficult evening for the Actors Union had begun earlier when more than 1,000 technicians and other film workers marched through Wellington after an impromptu meeting at the Weta facility in Miramar. By the time they arrived at a planned equity meeting, the meeting had been cancelled.
Ironically, tonight's meeting was actors meeting to discuss how to move forward, what they wanted in terms of terms and conditions to enable us to continue the process we've already started. By this action, by making us cancel that meeting, they've actually set the process back to lead to resolution.
But what were the technicians told before they marched? And more particularly, were they told that the Actors Union had caved on its demands and agreed to withdraw the boycott?
We made that resolution at the end of last week. We communicated it, in fact, over the weekend.
Did the production company, Warner's, hold back that news in order to exploit the union's weakness? The email trail seemed to say so.
To be honest, John, we're a little baffled ourselves, and probably Sir Peter is the best guy to ask about this.
But if Peter Jackson was really faking it the next night on Close Up, he's surely working the wrong side of the camera.
How dare you? You are choosing an Australian union over the workers of our country. So stuff her. I don't care what the hell she says.
Meanwhile, the CTU's Helen Kelly found herself being attacked by a hobbit from the Hawke's Bay.
When a gentle giant of a man like Sir Richard Taylor and his people go into the street, you've got something happening that's very unpleasant.
But perhaps the whole strange story was summed up in Robin Malcolm's close-up appearance.
So there's no mention of banning people from The Hobbit?
There's no mention of banning people from The Hobbit.
So why did the Screen Actors Guild put out a statement saying we've withdrawn the boycott?
Well, we lifted it over the weekend.
So there was a threat of a ban. You can't lift something that's not there.
So there never was a boycott and it was lifted on Sunday. Confused? Don't be. This is the Prime Minister and he brings clarity.
An agreement has been reached between New Zealand, the New Zealand Government and Warner Brothers. As part of the arrangement, the Government will introduce legislation tomorrow into Parliament to clarify the distinction between independent contractors and employees as it relates only to the film production industry. It is this clarification that will guarantee the movies are made in New Zealand.
Oh, can I have my own law too? Deserves a movie of its own, doesn't it? Now, why would the country's leading business paper publish a picture of its editor looking like a convict? Because, according to the publisher of the National Business Review, Barry Coleman, that was a potential consequence of a demand from the Serious Fraud Office to hand over notes and transcripts relevant to its investigation of South Canterbury Finance. The notice to require production of documents was accompanied by a reminder that a failure to comply with the Serious Fraud Act 1990 could result in a 2-year jail term and a $50,000 fine. Well, no one's gone to jail yet, so was this the big stick of a draconian law, or is the paper milking it? I'm joined now by the reporter whose story is at the centre of it all, Matt Nippert, and his editor, Nevil Gibson. Welcome to you both, gentlemen. Now, Matt, briefly describe for me the story at the centre of all this fuss. What was it about and why would the SFO be so interested in it?
Well, I guess South Canterbury Finance is to business journalists what a war would be for a foreign correspondent. It's enormous. There are financial mass graves up and down the country and atrocities committed by almost every party. And the only way to look at it is in discrete chunks. And I'd heard rumours that the Hyatt Hotel was South Canterbury's largest debt. And I sort of looked into the ownership and acquisition of this asset and discovered that there were some really strange things going on with shareholding. And indeed, in early 2009, the hotel was signed over to Peter Symes, a brother-in-law of South Canterbury Finance Director Edward Sullivan, who was a retired meat worker with terminal cancer, who'd never visited the Hyatt in his life, and just said he signed papers sent up from Timaru at the direction of his brother-in-law. Quite clearly, this was a related party loan that was shuffled sideways and pretended that it wasn't.
And it was a good lead story for you as well.
That was magnificent. It was the entire front page. It was just a very strange business story. We weren't entirely sure where it would go. We heard some whispers that it had attracted some interesting attention, but we didn't really know anything more about that until last week.
So what happened last week? You got the nasty gram.
We had a quick read of it. It seemed quite definitive. We couldn't fight it. Sought legal advice. I prepared my notes at the anticipation that we would have to hand it over, given there didn't seem to be any room for appeal. And then a serious fraud representative showed up at the office at 5. I just finished having a cigarette. In fact, was in the lift with him on the way up. And then was told we'd had a conversation with our lawyers, with our publisher Barry Coleman, and decided not to hand them over. I was told to take the documents and the tape off the premises, and I did, back past the serious fraud office guy who didn't yet recognise me, down onto the street, and then wondered what to do. So I dumped the tape and papers at Sal's Pizza on Commerce Street.
Which actually I noticed because I was actually reading the fine print of the law, and it only applies to information that's actually on the premises that they're visiting, doesn't it?
Yes, well, it was quite safe down at Sal's until the gentleman I often buy pizza from finished his shift at 9 o'clock that night.
Sounds risky. Now, Neville, in the end, it all seems to have been fairly cordial. The Serious Fraud Office has Matt's transcript and interview. They're speaking to Mr Symes. It all seems settled. What was the problem?
Well, I must say that I was a little bit relaxed when the 2 emails came in, or the 2 attachments, because we read that one and we really didn't take it too seriously until we say, well, we'd better take some legal advice on that, because I've been around long enough to know that you don't hand over any documents to anybody without actually thinking about it. And it was actually 2 attachments, so the one about the jail sentences and so on actually had to open a second document. Then we thought, wow, I'm not going that way. So we... How
do you mean you're not going that way? You're going to comply?
No. We thought, hey, this has got long-term implications, no question about it.
It was a stand on principle in the first instance then?
Oh, definitely. We just really wanted the comfort of a legal opinion. My hunch said that, we should very seriously consider not complying with this because of the implications.
Matt, what was at stake in a practical sense if they had really dropped the bomb, come in, grabbed everything you had? Did you have sources you needed to protect?
There were a number of sources for that story. The most principal one was public. That was the company's office. The interview with Mr Symes was on the record. That's what they had requested. Full credit to the Serious Fraud Office for not operating a blanket approach. But if they had asked for everything, there were a number of very senior and well-placed sources that I would have had to disclose, and it would have really impeded my work, given the number of calls and interesting documents I've had sent through the post over the last couple of weeks.
Now, the intriguing thing here, Neville, is that had this been the police doing this, things would have been quite different, wouldn't they? You would have had some protection under the Evidence Act 2006 to protect sources. A lot
of choices there, because we would have... well, like the media, we're used to getting injunctions and that sort of thing. You expect that there'd be some sort of process. You could argue to a judge. In some cases, they can put an injunction on you where you can't argue your case. It was very weird. I felt that we could not actually respond to this other than invoking the penalties you've outlined. And I thought that this is obviously an aspect of the Serious Fraud Office that nobody, in my experience with the Media Freedom Committee, that these clauses have never been raised as a problem.
So this is absolutely new. The SFO hasn't tried to do this before?
The media put a lot of effort over many years on just about every little clause in the law, because there's no question that the law drafters like to put these clauses in. Fishing expeditions, you name it. And we've got to be very vigilant. But this Act went through 20 years ago, and it was at a time when there was seemed to be a lot of white-collar crime and fraud around. Then the SFO was going to be absorbed into the police. The Bill of Rights would apply to the Serious Fraud Office, which it doesn't at the moment. And so that's, it was my background experience in this that told me this is one where we've got to get this Act changed.
Yeah, out of interest, Neville, before we move on to that, what was NBR's attitude towards the SFO being absorbed into the police as an investigative unit? Would it fix things?
I could only describe it as very cosy, actually. Yeah, I think the current director...
Did you or did you not support the absorption of the SFO into the police?
Well, editorially, I thought it was a good idea. And I'm guided a little bit by Sir Geoffrey Palmer's change of opinion, because he told us personally at the Media Freedom Committee, when I've asked him questions when we've about this, because it is quite a sensitive matter for the media, that when he set it up, and of course the Bill of Rights came later, when he set it up it had these draconian powers, which he doesn't think personally now, and I don't either, that they should be just act as normal police do.
So is this a campaign for the paper now?
Oh, it is, definitely, yeah, because I discussed this with Barry as well, and we've decided to make a stand on it. Unfortunately, I'm the fall guy, so the little picture we published may come to pass.
You were the guy named, weren't you?
Mm.
The interesting thing is, Matt, you're working for a paper which has a proprietor who's in the office. That's increasingly rare these days. Do you think that had an impact on the extent to which the paper was prepared to stand behind you?
Well, it helped an awful lot. In fact, I think Barry had been out of the office, came back as I was working on the story, liked it so much, so he gave it over the entire front page. Certainly I've worked in sort of, I guess, what you call corporate media, APN, and they tend to be a little bit more cautious legally, but I think Barry's got a sort of a big bank balance, and even bigger kahunas in this case, and was willing to to make a stand, so despite what any financial consequences might be.
Do you see it that way, Neville? Was there an advantage on having a proprietor who could stand up and say no rather than a corporate?
Oh, definitely. We weren't looking for legal opinions to get around it, or even to make it happier for us to hand them over. But in the event, we saw that there were two aspects to this. One is we didn't have sensitive information that would compromise us, but we wanted to send the message out to everybody else, including the rest of the media, that a key thing, and this is recognised around the world and just come up in a case in Canada, where if people can't give confidential information to journalists and feel the full protection of what the media company can do. I mean, they may not have the protection of law, but at least we've got to give an undertaking that someone can't come and just grab that information and expose the whistleblower or whoever is providing that information.
We'll see how that plays out. Matt, just finally, is there much more to know about South Canterbury Finance?
Well, I guess another way to answer that question is how long is an extremely tangled piece of string?
That was no bleak answer. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Matt Nippert and Nevil Gibson, thank you. After the break, Chile's live telenovela and MediaWorks' new demographics.